Hey everybody, Matt Kloskowski here, and on behalf of myself and everybody over at On One Software, I just wanted to say thank you for joining us here today. Figured I'd just show you the stuff that I do here, and we're gonna go ahead and just jump right into it. This software, everything's always evolving, and Lightroom being where it is, it's where I start. But I definitely don't finish inside of Lightroom. So I wanted to show you the workflow in a few different ways of how I use Lightroom and Photoshop and plugins together. So let's go ahead and let's start off with this photo I took here. This is out in Jackson Hole, Grand Teton National Park. And what we're going to do here is I'm in Lightroom. I just kind of bring the exposure down a little bit. I can't go down as far as I want because I'd make everything a little bit too dark. So I'm just going to bring the exposure down. And that's generally what I do inside of Lightroom. I take care of overall exposure and color changes that I want to do. Not too much on color here. I might just cool it just a little bit. We'll come over here. I don't have it much in shadows, but I think the highlights could stand to come down a little bit. So I'll bring those highlights down just a hair, and I could probably even bring the exposure back up. Get some whites in there and some blacks. It's just going to add a little bit of contrast. And honestly, things like finishing touches like vignettes and things like that, I know I could do here inside of Lightroom, but I know I'm going to leave Lightroom anyway, and I'd just rather do it somewhere else. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to press Command E on the Mac or Control E on a PC, and this is going to take us over into Photoshop. Photoshop is where I do retouching. All right, when I say retouching, and we're talking about a landscape photo here, so when I say retouching, it's not portrait retouching, but it's things like taking my spot healing brush. All right, go over here to the toolbox, grab the spot healing brush, and I'll zoom into the photo, and you can see there's some spots and things here. All right, so I'm just going to go in, just click and get rid of all those, because whatever we do next, those spots will just they'll get enhanced, and they'll become really hard to get rid of later on. So that's why I pretty much try to get rid of that stuff as early as possible. Okay, and this is the point you'd get rid of any distractions in the photo. So we've got spots and everything down here, but any little areas that just don't maybe enhance the photo as much, and especially things to me that are so small that they could be almost misconstrued as spots, I'll go ahead and get rid of them. Like this post over here doesn't do too much for me, and a couple other things around there. So we'll just go ahead. Here's another spot that we can get rid of, but I think that takes care of everything pretty good for the most. Oh, a couple spots up here. All right, so once I get what we'll call retouching down, all right, that's when I'm ready to go ahead and finish off the photo. So we'll come up here to the File menu, and I'll go into Automate Perfect Effects 4, and that's generally where I do all of my finishing touches to my photos. All right, they start off in Lightroom. They'll go into Photoshop for any basic retouching that needs to be done, and then I'm going to finish things off inside of Perfect Effects. That to me, it's got the effects, honestly, that I think Photoshop should have. Things that take layers and blend modes and all these different things to do. I think we're able to do them very, very quickly inside of Perfect Effects. So I got Perfect Effects open. What kind of things do I do here? The number one thing that I do is I go under Contrast, and there's this nice little preset here. It's called Tonal Contrast. There's actually two. I click on Tonal Contrast and I take a look at it, and then I click on Turbo Boost. And I kind of make a decision between the two, which I like. I'm going for more of a contrasty look here, so I'm actually going to click on Tonal Contrast. But I think it's a little bit too strong, so I'm just going to reduce the amount. Come right over here, over to that layers area, and just reduce the amount of it. Okay? Then we'll click on Add. Let's go up here, and we're going to go to, I'm going to go to Basic Brushes. Now, this to me is, it's one of the things that sets On One's plugins, personally, aside from everything else, because I can go and I can do different things without having to leave the program and come into something else. And here's what I mean by that. I want to work with the sky. I kind of, along the process, I'm not realizing that I want to work with the sky until I'm already in here, and I want to darken the sky. Could I darken the sky any number of ways before I ever even came into the plugin? Yes. But what happens if you're 3/4 of the way through your editing process and you realize you want to do something? Do you then leave the plugin to go do it in Photoshop just because you can? No, you stay here and you can take advantage of things, and things like brush darker. All right, go right under basic brushes. Click on brush darker. They've got this little perfect brush here. I turn that on. And what I'm going to do is just make my brush a little bit larger and just come over here and just paint right along the mountain range. That's going to take care of, when I paint right along the top there, that's going to take care of the line. And then I turn perfect brush off because it's a little faster without it. And then I paint, and I'm able to use a larger brush up here in the top areas. Again, could I do that somewhere else? Absolutely. I could do it somewhere else, but I'm already here. I'm already finishing things off. So it's just easier to have that brush, and I don't have points and things that I have to drag and try to figure out. Everything uses a brush. Lightroom uses a brush. Photoshop uses a brush. A brush is easy to do. And we'll darken a little bit down here. Okay. And I'm actually going to increase the amount this time. It's going to make it a little bit darker. Come down here. We can click on our preview. You can see that's before and that's after. I'm going to click add one more time. And there's another brush that I like in here, which is brush HDR. So we're going to go click on that, and I'm going to brush, and I'm going to reduce the amount setting because I already know it's going to be too high. I'm going to brush into the Tetons back here and also onto the barn. Okay. And you can turn these little eyeball icons off and turn them on. You can get a feel for how they're working here, so you can see exactly what it's doing. I'm going to click on add one more time, and I've already saved it. You'll find it under the vignettes section down here toward the bottom. But whenever I find something that I really like, if I find one that I like, I click on that little flag right over here, and it saves it in my favorites. So I can come over here and I can get right to it. This one's called Big Softy, and I might pull back on the brightness just a little, increase the midpoint, feather, and you can see here before, after. So it's just adding a vignette to it, and I can always come here and reduce it if I want. Click add one more time, and I'll probably finish things off, and I have it saved over here as a favorite again. It's a sharpening preset, amazing detail. So it's just going to go over there and just kind of finish things off with some sharpening for me. Again, if I hit my preview, you can see before, after. Don't forget, a lot of these things have keyboard shortcuts. So if I come up here to the view menu, preview mode, you can see a whole bunch of different ways. Command or Control P for preview, so I don't even have to come down here. I just hit Command P on the Mac, Control P on the PC. Oh, look, I got a Google alert, and but I can see my preview here. Let's go ahead and do this. Let me, so that you don't keep seeing my email, shut it down. See, some people might start over for that, but you should see everything. Okay. All right. So back to our story here. So we have our photo here. Everything is pretty much done. So I'm going to go ahead and click apply. And what this is going to do, it's basically going to save everything. It's going to apply all the effects and everything like that. And it'll take me back into Photoshop because that's where I was. Remember, I went from Lightroom to Photoshop. All right. I didn't go from Lightroom directly into Perfect Effects. And we'll take a look at how you can do that later. If you're going to leave Photoshop out of the whole equation altogether, that's totally fine. We'll see how we can do that. But for now, I went into Photoshop because there was some retouching that I wanted to do. And so here we are. We're back inside of Photoshop. Again, if I had to do any Photoshop work, I could do to it. But at this point, to get that whole round trip working between Photoshop and Lightroom, I just hit File, Save. Photoshop's going to save the file, and it's going to show it to me right back over here inside of Lightroom. It's going to show up right next to the original one. So you can see, and I'll go ahead here and I'll click Reset in the Develop module. Okay. And I think it was overexposed a little bit, so I'll pull back the exposure because I think that was almost too drastic of a change. But you can see here, that's before, that's after. All right, before, after, and you know, while I have the photo open inside of Photoshop, because I kind of noticed something, I'm going to reduce the size because I find it works a little bit faster. I was shooting with a D800, so the file sizes are just huge. And whether you're using Photoshop, Lightroom, whatever you're using, you'll find they move a lot slower. But I'm just going to jump back into the plugin because as it was closing, I saw a good point. I saw something that I wanted to try out, and I saw it's a good point of having all these presets and all these effects is that you can kind of very quickly try a bunch of different things. But I just want to jump back in here. Under effects, if you go down here, and especially, it sounds silly, but if I'm shooting landscapes, I go to landscape. I thought autumn looked pretty cool. Like, I tried to go with what I considered more of a realistic rendition of the scene that I saw. It was probably 45 minutes and an hour after sunrise. Sky was blue, sun on everything, so I wasn't going to try to make the color really crazy, but you can do some pretty neat things here, and I think that looks pretty cool. I might not keep it quite as strong, but I'd reduce it by about 50%, but I think that really gives an overall a nice tone to the photo. Kind of takes, because I wasn't at this location for sunrise. I was at another location for sunrise, but I wanted to see this location, so it kind of takes, it takes it from that to somewhere in between that, when you do it about 50%, and it kind of gives a little bit more of that golden hour type of a look to it. So that's one of the benefits of having all these different presets here, is that you can very quickly experiment with them. And when I have a landscape, I always go straight to that landscape section, because more times than not, I'm going to find something underneath here that looks pretty cool. All right, so let's go ahead and cancel out of there. Back over into, and I can close this one down because we're done with it. Back over into Lightroom. Another thing is, I think the effects are great for travel photos. Okay, everybody loves to travel, and a lot of times we're stuck with the lighting conditions and whatever we have inside of travel photos, and I think presets and effects work great for enhancing some of those photos. So here's an example here. In the develop module, things that I would do, I'd probably pull back. Let's reset these. I'd probably pull back on the highlights, I think the Eiffel Tower was just a little bit too bright. And I think blacks will add a little bit more contrast to the overall photo, and maybe warm it up just a little bit. But it's like, I want the Eiffel Tower. I want to get that warmth there, but I kind of like the blue sky. So we're almost stuck here in what we can do, but we can fix this in a lot of ways. So let's go ahead, photo, edit in Photoshop. Now, while I'm in Photoshop, what's the first thing I do? The thing that really Lightroom or Perfect Effects or any of the On1 plugins really can't do is retouching. Now, I don't mean portrait retouching, because On1 actually has a plugin that'll do that. I mean the retouching I'm talking about here, where we're removing distractions. So I would take my lasso tool, and I would probably lasso this little thing down here, that little sign, hit the delete key. It's going to pop up the fill dialog, and I just hit OK with content aware, and then that goes away. Hit the letter J, go to my spot healing brush. There's some flare. And if you look around through the photo, you'll just find a lot of little spots. Just junk. So we'll just get rid of all that stuff while we can. All right, a couple more here. Gosh, the sensor was dirty. I have since cleaned it. I'm pretty sure it's dirty again, but it's just a struggle that we face every day. So let's see here. I think that's pretty good as far as our little spots go inside of there. So let's head up to the file menu, automate, and I'm going to come down here to Perfect Effects once again. And so we're going to take this in a slightly different direction. I am going to do the same thing that I did before. We're going to go straight to contrast, and I love my tonal contrast. I'm going to click Turbo Boost. It's kind of cool. I'll go with tonal contrast. And I'm not even going to reduce it too much here. I'll take it down just a little bit, but I kind of like the contrast that we got. You can even see before, after here. Let's crank it back up. And you know what? The cool thing about tonal contrast, sometimes you want it to go away or lessen the effect of it. Sometimes you want more. You can always come down here and you can crank up that local contrast setting, and that'll do it for you. Let's click on Add. And we're going to come over here. I'm going to go to Movie Looks. Movie Looks is one of the ones that I use all the time for travel photos. Okay, it sounds kind of weird. Movie travel, I guess it doesn't sound too weird. But I'll come look through here. And it's interesting. One of my favorite ones under here, and it's Paris, is Moulin Rouge. So I'm going to click on that one. I think that one looks pretty cool. I also like Kryptonite a lot here. I think I'm going to go with Kryptonite. So let's go ahead and reduce the opacity of the Kryptonite setting just a little bit. We'll hit add. And I'll close down Movie Looks. And let's go through here and let's just go under color correction. And even if you don't want to correct the color, I think you can still do a lot of interesting things with color correction. So one of the ones that I like over here is warm highlights, cool shadows. See what that does? Look at that. Here, let me turn it off for a second. Before, after. See what it does to the sky and the Eiffel Tower and everything? Again, it's warm highlights. So it's going to warm the highlights and cool the shadows. So I kind of like that. Now, personally, it might be a little bit too much. In fact, I think it's a little bit too blue-greenish up here in the sky, but we'll just reduce the opacity a little bit. Remember, it's all on separate layers over here, and these layers work just like layers do inside of Photoshop. So just reduce the opacity. If you ever want to paint it out, cool shadows means that the shadowy stuff over here probably got very cool. Maybe I don't want that quite as much. I can use my brush, and that's the advantage of having the brush here. Everybody knows how to use a brush. It's right here, and that's, it's why I prefer the On-One products, is because I can get so much more done inside them. So all I can do is show you the way that I do it, which is rather than leaving here and doing it on a layer inside of Photoshop, even though I could, I would just brush the effect right out here. Okay, so again, we can click the layer, and we can see the before and after. Okay, and I'd click add one more time and finish things off. Remember, I have one of my favorites set up, which is Amazing Detail, and that would just do some sharpening for me. Click apply. It's going to apply all the effects for us. It'll bring it back just like the last image did. It'll bring it back as a layer inside of Photoshop, because remember, we started off in Lightroom, went to Photoshop for some quick retouching and whatnot, and then we headed over into the plugin. So it'll bring it right back over here for us. And you could go in, I could still grab my spot healing brush if I see some of that flare, especially when you add some of those effects. You'll notice that sometimes flare, you'll notice that everything just gets enhanced when you add those effects to it. So you have to be a little bit careful there. You might want to do some combination of your spot healing brush and your clone stamp tool to go in there and to just remove some of those little spots that you see here. Okay, I'm not going to try to get rid of all the flare. Honestly, I think some of the flare actually works for the photo. All right, so we'll come over here. I'll do File, Save. Remember, that's how you keep the link between Lightroom and Photoshop alive. And then we'll hop back over here into Lightroom, and now you can see I'll hit Reset. That's before, that's after. Before, and then after. And very quickly, here's another photo for us. We'll go into, again, I'm working on a travel type of a theme here. I'll edit this one inside of Photoshop. I'm not going to do too much in terms of what I would fix here, other than maybe come over here, see if we can't. There's just a little bit of flare there, but I honestly thought I was going to do more to it. You could spend some time and try to get rid of that. I took this out of a car. This is in Dubai, and I was just amazed at the scenery, and the sun was just this big ball because of the haze that's there. So I took this out of a car, so there's a little bit of glare down there. You could try to clone that out. I'm gonna just crop it out just like that. Okay, and you know what might actually even help this a little bit here is to grab your lasso tool. And I don't like things in the corners of my photo like that. So I'd grab my lasso tool, hit the delete key, content aware, and at least get rid of that little thing over there. All right, same thing over here, File, Automate, Perfect Effects. And things that I like here, and in fact, one of them opened up straight to it. Autumn, I want a really warm look for this one. I'm actually going to go through a couple of them here. Golden Hour Enhancer, that's another one that I like. So it's really meant for Golden Hour, but I think it works great for this. And that's under my favorites, but if you wanted to find it, and here's a little tip for you if you didn't know. If you see me using something in here and you're wondering where it is, if you're under any of the things up here, you can click search and type it in. So even if and it's very, very possible, I will forget to mention where something is. If you see one you like, just go search for it up there. But Golden Hour is under landscapes. Okay. But I already hit add over here. And let's go down to, I'm going to go straight to my favorites because I know tonal contrast and turbo boost. I'm going to hit turbo boost really quick. You know what? I think I like turbo boost better for this one. So we'll leave it there. Hit add. And finally finish it up with Big Softy for a vignette. All right. And you can see the difference here. Preview before. And then after, and of course I say finish it up, but you really need to finish it up with some amazing detail because you need some sharpening for it too. Okay. And I'll hit apply. Same thing because we came over here from Lightroom. It's going to go, because we went into Photoshop from Lightroom, it's going to go straight back to Photoshop and we'll just hit save from there. But I will show you, I promise, how to just come straight in from Lightroom. So we'll save it, close it. And take a look back here on Lightroom. So that's the photo that we started with. And that's our final image. To me, this is where effects and presets shine. You know, because I capture this image, it had this look to me. You know, it was just so big and so surreal to be driving down this highway and see these huge buildings everywhere. But it didn't, you know, it doesn't convey the feeling that I really had when I was there, but that's the feeling with that sun and it was hot and everything like that. So to me, that's a lot of what effects help us do. Okay, so that takes care of travel. Let's take a look at another thing, and this happens all the time. So here's a scenario. I'm out this is in Death Valley. All right. And it's the bad water salt flats, and these hexagonal patterns get formed by all this salt. It's pretty neat. You know, photographers love patterns. Well, the problem is no matter what f-stop we use, we want to get down low and we want to focus and we want all this to be tack sharp up here. But the problem is what's back here is not always going to be as sharp. So what I did is I took two photos. I focused up close, and then for the second photo, I focused back here. Okay, and you can see, I'll zoom in, you can see how they're sharp. Here, let's take a look here. Okay, so you can see really sharp there, not quite as sharp here. Not quite as sharp here, but what is sharp? Up front, really sharp up front. What's up front in this photo though? See, not quite as sharp. So what we can do here is we can actually use one of the plugins from On1 to take care of this. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, hey, I could just do this in Photoshop, I could merge these together in Photoshop, you absolutely could. The thing is I hear time and time again, people love Lightroom and they don't want the complexity of Photoshop. So if you fall into that category, there's some very, very basic layer things that you can do. And I think focus, sharpness, stacking, which we have here, I think is a great candidate for that. Okay. And what you do first is, you do your Lightroom stuff first, set your white and your black point, which is going to set, a nice amount of contrast for the photos. So set your white and black point for both photos. You can do some clarity. You can do some vibrance, add a little bit more color, get all that done. When you're done, you go up here to the file menu, go down to export, and you're going to see that you can export straight to Photo Suite 7. Okay, so you can export to Photo Suite 7, and what it's going to do is it's going to open up both of those photos into On1's Photo Suite. And it's going to open them up as layers. You can see there's a whole layer section over here. So what do we got? We got two layers on top of each other. So much, much more simple than Photoshop. There's not 15 menus and all crazy stuff. We have layers. One layer, the bottom one with the eyeball icon on right now, is the good mountains in the background, but up front a little bit blurrier. You can see it. When I turn on the top layer, you can see up front is sharper, but the mountains are not. So what do? All you got to do is take the brush. Okay, and I don't even need to, the perfect brush will keep the masking perfect. So if I had trees and things up here that I wanted to be perfect, I would do that. But honestly, I don't need it in this circumstance. All I want to do, remember, the layer that we're looking at up top right now is the sharp foreground, blurry mountains. So what do? I paint the mountains away. Paint the mountains away. What happens? I'm painting them away, and I'm showing the mountains that are underneath because that was the sharp layer that we had underneath here. So now take a look. That's everything is blurry, but the mountains back here are sharp. I turn the top one on. Now I got the sharp foreground. So I got them both together, and then you just hit save, and you're good to go. So you're doing Photoshop-like things, but you're not going into Photoshop and the complexity of Photoshop. If you already have On1 software, well, then you can do a lot of those things right inside of On1, a lot of layer-related things without having to leave the photo suite. All right, let's close out of there, and we'll hop back over to Lightroom. Portraits. So I got to tell you a story with this, and true story. I was out and visiting Portland, and I stopped by the offices at On1, and they were showing me the portrait retouching plugin that they have. And I wasn't trying to be arrogant, but I had said, I think I can retouch faster inside of Photoshop. I know Photoshop pretty well, so I don't think that the plugin it'd be too simplistic for me. And so one of the guys said, he's like, all right, well, why don't we both open the same photo, and let's do a little contest. I totally got smoked. Like, I was 20% into retouching the portrait, and he's like, I'm done. And I looked at it, and of course I'm going to look at it with a scrutinizing eye because I just got beat, and the retouching looked great. So at that point, it became a believer, and not just because I got beat on one photo, but I'm going to show you why in a second, where it really made me realize that something like this works great. So here we've got a portrait. We would just do your Lightroom settings that you're going to do first. So I always do whites and blacks, overall exposure, right? Shadows, if we want to bring out some of the detail in the shadows here. Okay, so I think once you do your Lightroom stuff, I'm not even going to go into Photoshop because Photoshop is where I would do retouching. So I don't need to do that. So I'm going to go Photo Edit in, and we'll come down here to Perfect Portrait. And it's going to make a copy of the file for us, and it'll take us over into the Perfect Portrait plugin here. And you'll see it takes a second to open, but it's doing something. It's actually doing work for us at this point. You don't know it, but it actually is pretty much retouching the portrait for you. And what do I mean by that? It's finding the faces, and it's finding the facial features. Once it does that, your work is pretty much done. There's really not too much work left to do. So let me hide this so we can see this a little bit larger. So, and the face that you're working on is the face that the green box is around. Okay, so I've clicked on the woman's face here, so that's what we're working on. But look at what it's done. It's actually drawn these little paths around her facial features. And you can always click on them if it gets pretty close, but you'll want to go in here and you can click. I found her teeth, her mouth, and over here the eye. I think we can expand that a little bit, and your job is almost done at this point, because at this point all you do is move sliders. Blemishes, exactly what it says, right? If I bring it down lower, any little blemishes she has here, we'll see, so we can bring that up. Smoothing, I think it starts out at a good place for smoothing. I will go too high just to show you. See how her skin gets that porcelain smooth, which we don't want. So I think 20 to 30 is a good smoothing spot here. Shine, if they do have any shine, it kind of just makes it a little bit flatter. We don't have any of those problems here. I don't have anything with shadows. Texture, if you do smooth the skin and you want to add some facial texture back into it, you can do that. And then even this just smooths things out for you. So sometimes things will get a little bit blotchy. All right, come down here, color correction. Sometimes people's faces are a little bit too red. You can counteract that. with color correction. And there's also ethnicity, so you can change to whatever ethnicity they happen to be. And then mouth and eyes. You want to whiten the eyes a little bit more? ET? No, we won't go that far. And then the details. That's all the details inside the eyes. And then the mouth. So I think we could probably whiten the teeth a little bit more here. Okay. But that's pretty much it. It's done all of the work for us. You can see the preview. That's before. All right. And that's after. So while it took a second to get in because it's analyzing the faces, once it analyzes the faces, all you do is move sliders. You don't have to do anything else. And that's where I lost. That's what I lost to is I thought by the time the plugin opens that I could have had a lot of things done. What I didn't realize is that it still takes a little bit longer than I thought. So I'm going to hit apply here. And as far as the little boy goes, there's really not much retouching that you ever have to do on kids. So the portrait retouching, mostly for women. Not in a bad way. It's just you don't typically retouch guys because you don't smooth guys' skin and things like that. You might whiten their eyes a little bit, might whiten the teeth a little bit, but that's about it. Okay, but kids, we don't typically have too much that we have to do. So anyway, it's going to save the image back here. Since we came over here from Lightroom, it's actually going to save the image back over into Lightroom for us rather than inside of Photoshop. Okay, because we never went into Photoshop because Photoshop is the place that I would have gone into to do retouching. So we bypassed that whole product here. Okay, and so here's our retouched image. You can go to the one next to it and I could hit reset. So before and after, and I zoom in because that's really what we're looking at here. Before, after. Okay. All right. Now, there's one key advantage here, and you're going to see that advantage, what I talked about earlier, and that is typically you don't just have one photo. All right, and I'm going to show this to you in another circumstance here with some other pictures. But typically you don't just have one photo. This was a family portrait shoot that I did. So I have 5, 10, 15, 20 photos that I'm going to send them. I don't want to retouch every single photo. So what you can do is you can batch. So let's just so you can see, file export. Okay, and I can export to Perfect Portrait. So I could select 10 different photos down here and export them all to Perfect Portrait. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm just going to kind of keep things moving along here. I'm just going to do them with some sand dunes that I have. I took these out in Death Valley. One of the friends that I was with actually said, you know, she was shooting them and she's like, they almost look black and white in camera. And I was like, that's a great idea. You know, they'd make, once the light got a little bit harsh, I put my zoom lens on and just started shooting patterns. And I thought they'd make great black and whites. So of course you'd go in, like my vision for this was that there would be, it'd just be patterns. So I would go in and maybe crop a little bit. So you're not going to see any sky. Okay. Same thing here. Crop this out because my vision was it was just all patterns. There was no sky, no anything like that. So I'm going to select all these images here. We'll go File, Export, and I'm going to export to Perfect Black and White. And then what you can do here is you can go under your presets. So there's category, basic, hint of color, Hollywood portrait. I'll go with basic fundamentals, and I'll just do the default settings here. Basic fundamentals, default settings. I'll put into subfolder. I'll call that batch, and go ahead and everything looks good from there. We can resize the photos. Image format, if you want it to keep the layers, you can choose PSD. If you're okay if it flattens it, you can just choose JPEG here. I'll leave PSD on so it keeps all the layers. And it looks a lot like Lightroom's export dialog box because it is. But I'm going to hit export here. And this one's going to take a couple minutes. But what's going to happen is it's going to open up the black and white plugin, Perfect Black and White, and it's going to start processing the photos for me because I know what my favorite presets are, as you start to use it more, you'll start to realize your favorite presets. And believe it or not, I actually like the default preset that's inside of Perfect Black and White. So I knew that one, I was going to go straight to that preset. And you can see it's just kind of going through the photos and it's just applying the presets for me. And then when it's done, it brings them right back over here into Lightroom. So check it out. And we didn't do a thing. All right. We batched the whole thing. I can do, we're back to the color ones, but I batched the whole thing because once I knew I had the images that I wanted for black and white, I don't have to go in. I know what preset I'm going to apply. I don't have to manually go in there and apply it to each and every one of them. So big time saver for me, especially with portraits. If you got 10, 15, 20 portraits, just send them off by batch right into the plugin, and that way you don't have to go through each one. Okay, so folks, that pretty much takes care of all the stuff that I was going to talk about here. Again, we're so sorry that we couldn't accommodate for the webinar, but this is most of the stuff that I was going to talk about, even a couple more things that I thought about since the webinar. So we'll hopefully get more webinars going where we can figure out the whole attendance thing for that so that we don't get kicked out of it. But thanks for, I hope this helps, and thanks for coming by to watch. If you got any questions, feel free. I have a blog over at mattkay.com. And you can stop by there and you can leave a question on the blog. Just leave a question, whatever post happens to be up that way, up that day. And I'll even do posts when this video goes up. You can always send them over into On1 wherever you're watching this. But by all means, feel free to send in your questions. That way, the next time I do a webinar, I'll be able to get to some of those. And just thank you so much for coming by. I want to say a big thanks to On1, for making really cool plugins that I honestly do believe in. I think the plugins help what we do with Lightroom and Photoshop. And I think especially with Lightroom, I think the plugins help people kind of stay away from some of the complexity that we find out there in a lot of other programs. So really do believe in it. And I thank them for allowing me to be here and share some of my techniques of how I work with my photos for you guys. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again very soon.